You know her as Britain's Marilyn Monroe, the blonde bombshell who graced magazine covers and lit up cinema screens in the 1950s. But Diana Dors lived a double life, one where every glamorous photo shoot masked crushing debt, where every red carpet appearance came with a price tag paid in scandal.
Here with this terrific blaze of publicity and being the kind of sex symbol blonde, I, as not in the case of Hollywood, but everywhere in the world, set myself up in a position to be knocked down like a skittle.
She wasn't destroyed by one dramatic downfall. Instead, she spent 3 decades trapped in a machine that turned her most humiliating moments into cash.
You know, I've lived an extremely full life. I've had a wonderful life. I've also been, in my day, I've been a wicked so-and-so. I have. And I figure that you pay in life for what you've done, and you also get out of life what you put into it.
Where the very scandals that ruined her reputation became her only means of survival. This is the story of how Diana Dors became both the creator and victim of Britain's most profitable scandal machine. Diana Mary Fluck was born in 1931 in working-class Swindon, far from the glittering lights that would later define and undo her. At just 14, she earned a scholarship to the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, the youngest student in her class and already drawing notice for her striking looks and natural confidence. J. Arthur Rank's organization soon swept her into its charm school.
Diana came from a time where you were pretty much told what to do and where to go. They would have been taught to get in and out of a car correctly. I know they did things with stuff on top of their heads, and they would have been given parts to play and told what part you're going to play. In other words, you were fodder.
The training ground that promised to turn ambitious young hopefuls into Britain's answer to Hollywood glamour. The transformation from Diana Fluck to Diana Dors wasn't just a name change. It was the construction of an entirely new persona.
My mother, bless her, said, well, why don't you use a family name? She said, which was your grandmother's name, which was Dors, because the two names begin with the same letter. I didn't think it was a very good idea, but actually I realize now she was right, because Dors is a very uncommon name.
By 1953, she'd moved from supporting roles to leading lady status, commanding the screen with genuine dramatic ability.
I suppose I'm not so tough after all.
I suppose I knew that from the very beginning.
Her performance in Yield to the Night in 1956 proved she could handle serious dramatic material, playing a condemned woman with nuance and depth that surprised critics who'd dismissed her as mere decoration. Yet for every review praising her acting, 10 more focused on her measurements and platinum hair. The British press had found their Marilyn Monroe, and they weren't interested in letting her be anything else. Film producers marketed her curves before her talent, booking her for roles that emphasized sultry looks over substantive character development. The bombshell image sold tickets, and in post-war Britain's entertainment industry, that mathematics trumped artistic ambition. Diana herself seemed to embrace the comparison initially, understanding that the Monroe Association opened doors that talent alone might not. But while Monroe had Hollywood's studio system providing some protection and guidance, at least in her early years, Dors found herself pushed into increasingly provocative publicity from the start. The difference would prove crucial. Where Monroe's image was carefully managed by powerful studios, Diana's would be exploited by those closest to her. In 1951, Diana married Dennis Hamilton, born Dennis Gittins, a theatrical agent who saw in the 20-year-old starlet not a wife, but a product to be packaged and sold. Hamilton didn't simply manage Diana's career. He manufactured every aspect of her public persona, pushing her toward increasingly risque modeling sessions and what the industry euphemistically called adult-oriented film comedies. Hamilton established Diana Dors Limited, ostensibly to manage his wife's growing income, but the company became his personal cash machine.
The narrative has been that he controlled her career and controlled the things that she did, but I think that she had more control of her career than people thought.
While Diana believed her earnings were being invested and saved, Hamilton was siphoning funds for his own extravagant lifestyle. He lived like a Hollywood mogul on his wife's labor, all while maintaining complete control over her contracts and appearances. The psychological control matched the financial exploitation. Diana later revealed that Hamilton had forced her, at gunpoint, to sign over her assets during their separation proceedings. Whether literal or metaphorical, this detail captured the essence of their relationship, a marriage built on coercion and manipulation rather than partnership. Hamilton shaped Diana's image as a party girl and libertine purely to generate controversy that could be turned into quick cash. By 1958, the truth emerged with devastating clarity. Diana discovered that Diana Dors Limited was drowning in debt, particularly to the Inland Revenue for unpaid taxes. Hamilton had been using the company to fund his lifestyle while avoiding tax obligations, leaving Diana facing bills that would eventually total £53,000, over £1 million in today's money. The sex symbol image he'd created wasn't just her brand. It had become her prison, the only way to earn enough to pay debts she hadn't even known existed. The revelation came too late for Diana to recover what Hamilton had stolen, but not too late for one form of poetic justice. In 1959, Dennis Hamilton died suddenly at age 35 from tertiary syphilis, a disease that had apparently afflicted him for years. His death freed Diana from his direct control, but the financial and reputational damage he'd inflicted would shadow her for the rest of her life. Hollywood beckoned in 1956 when RKO Pictures dangled a contract that seemed to promise everything: American stardom, international recognition, and a way out of the tawdry projects Dennis Hamilton had been steering her into back home. Diana arrived in Los Angeles with fanfare, positioned as Britain's newest blonde export. The studio gave her roles alongside George Gobel in I Married a Woman and with Rod Steiger in The Unholy Wife, hoping to mold her into a bankable sensation. The turning point came at what should have been her crowning debut, a launch party that August at the Sunset Boulevard villa of celebrity hairdresser Mr. Teasy Weezy. The guest list sparkled with names like Doris Day, Lana Turner, and Liberace, and Diana appeared in a dazzling gown, ready for her Hollywood unveiling. Then the photographers swarmed. In the crush around the pool, Diana, Hamilton, her agent Louis Schur, and designer Howard Shoup were shoved into the water. Her gown sagged with the weight, her styled hair collapsed, and as she scrambled out, Hamilton lashed out, striking a photographer. What might have been a clumsy accident became an international incident. The next morning's headlines told the tale: "Miss Dors go home, and take Mr. Dors with you." Gossip columns painted her as British trouble, saddled with a volatile husband. A tentative house purchase from Lana Turner evaporated overnight. Executives who had once seen promise now saw risk. Within 2 years, RKO had had enough. Her films stumbled at the box office, audiences more fascinated by scandal than screen work. In December 1958, the studio cut ties, declaring she had become an object of disgrace, obloquy, ill will, and ridicule. The same allure that had won her the contract was now the pretext for her dismissal, leaving her Hollywood dreams sunk before they had a chance to float. Diana fought back with a lawsuit seeking $1.25 million in damages, eventually settling out of court for $200,000. But the money couldn't buy back her Hollywood dreams. At 27, her American career was effectively over before it had truly begun. She returned to Britain with her reputation in tatters, facing Hamilton's mounting debts and the reality that scandal had become her primary currency. By 1958, Diana was cornered. Hamilton was still alive but gone from her life, and in his wake she found nothing but ruin. Tax demands from the Inland Revenue, creditors stacking bills, and no money left to meet them. With her career faltering and her debts mounting, she turned to the only commodity she still controlled, her own scandal. News of the World, Britain's most voracious tabloid, offered a lifeline that came at a heavy price. Tell us about the notorious parties, and we'll keep the wolf from the door. The stories Diana sold weren't just salacious. They were explosive by 1950s standards. Over 12 weeks, followed by another 6 of lurid add-ons, the paper printed her accounts of so-called adult group parties at her West London home. She avoided naming names, but her descriptions were vivid enough that readers could supply their own suspects. It was a careful balance, just enough detail to sell papers, never enough to spark libel suits. The backlash was immediate. From the pulpit, Archbishop Jeffrey Fisher branded her a wayward hussy, a phrase that would haunt her for years. Newspapers that once celebrated her beauty now published editorials dripping with condemnation, and readers who had eagerly bought each issue to feast on her words joined in the chorus of outrage. Diana had stepped across a line that polite society insisted it would never forgive, though it couldn't look away either. Yet the serialization served its purpose. It generated desperately needed cash. The exact amount varies by source, but it was enough to keep creditors at bay temporarily. Diana had learned a brutal lesson about the economics of scandal. Shame paid better than talent in the world Hamilton had created for her. Every revelation diminished her reputation further, while paradoxically increasing her market value to the tabloids. The News of the World series established a pattern Diana would follow for the rest of her life. When money ran low, she'd return to the well of her past, selling another piece of her story to whoever would pay. 4 autobiographies would follow between 1978 and 1984, with titles like For Adults Only and Behind Closed Doors, each mining her scandals for profit. She'd become both vendor and product in the marketplace of notoriety. The 1960s brought disaster on top of debt. In 1961, a Guy Fawkes celebration at Diana's Raysbury home ended in tragedy when fireworks set the house ablaze. 3 guests were killed, another collapsed from a heart attack, and Diana only survived by leaping from an upstairs window. The fire destroyed the house and added a new kind of notoriety to her name. Her parties now seemed dangerous in ways no headline could soften. By 1968, the debts, lawsuits, and unpaid taxes had piled so high that she declared bankruptcy, owing £53,000, as creditors stripped away what was left. From those ruins, she rebuilt herself. The 1970s gave Diana a second act, not in film, but on television, where her wit and resilience became part of her persona. Audiences warmed to a star who could laugh at her own legend rather than run from it. She found steady success in Queenie's Castle from 1970 to 1972, where she played a sharp-tongued matriarch with a knowing smile, proving that scandal could be reshaped into survival if you had the nerve to keep performing. Game shows proved even more fertile ground for reinvention. On programs like Blankety Blank and Celebrity Squares, Diana deployed her scandals as punchlines, showing audiences she was in on the joke. Her appearance in Adam and the Ants' 1981 music video for Prince Charming introduced her to a generation who knew nothing of the News of the World serialization. To them, she was camp royalty, a survivor who'd outlasted her detractors. Television work couldn't entirely erase the past. Host after host would make sly references to her legendary parties. But it paid steadily and required no Hollywood approval. Diana had found a space where notoriety was currency rather than handicap. She'd answer cheeky questions about her past with perfectly timed one-liners, transforming from victim of scandal to its knowing narrator. The British public, always appreciative of a comeback story, warmed to this version of Diana Dors. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or pretending the scandals hadn't happened. Instead, she'd incorporated them into a new persona that acknowledged the past while refusing to be destroyed by it. Where the 1950s Diana had been Hamilton's creation, this 1970s version was entirely her own. In 1982, cancer arrived with terrible swiftness. The ovarian tumors were already advanced when doctors found them, and Diana knew her time was short. At 51, the woman who had outlasted scandal after scandal understood that her final act was approaching. But instead of retreating quietly, she chose to script one last story, something that would keep her name in circulation long after she was gone. The plan had the drama of a thriller. She devised a cipher, a coded puzzle that supposedly pointed to hidden money in banks scattered across Europe. Rather than leave a traditional will, she split the secret in 2. Her son, Mark Dawson, was given a sealed envelope to open only after her death. Her husband, Alan Lake, was said to hold the other half of the key. Only together could the two pieces unlock the mystery of Diana's hidden fortune. The rumored amount was staggering: £2 million, an impossible sum for someone who had declared bankruptcy only 14 years earlier. Where the money might have come from was itself part of the legend. Some whispered she had concealed earnings for years, squirreling funds away from tax collectors. Others insisted the whole scheme was a final publicity stunt, a star's last gift to the tabloids that had both destroyed and sustained her. After her death, the code was studied by computer experts. The forensic firm Inferens identified it as a variation of the Visionaire cipher and suggested that the keyword might have been her birth name, DMARYFLUCK. Decoding part of the message revealed lists of surnames and towns, clues perhaps to bank branches, but the vital second half of the code had vanished. When Alan Lake took his own life months after Diana's death, any piece he may have held died with him. No account numbers were ever found. No hidden fortune surfaced. The cipher remained unsolved, tantalizing researchers, journalists, and conspiracy theorists for decades. It became the perfect symbol of Diana's relationship with secrecy and scandal. Even facing death, she could not resist creating one more sensation, one more story the press would chase long after the cameras stopped rolling. Whether there was ever money behind the code mattered less than the mystery itself. Her cipher guaranteed she would still be making headlines years after the world had buried her. On May 4, 1984, Diana Dors' long fight ended. She died at Princess Margaret Hospital in Windsor, the cancer returning with a fury that her body could no longer withstand. She was 52. Days later, crowds gathered at the Sacred Heart Church in Sunningdale for her funeral. Cameras captured the scene like a final red carpet, Britain's blonde bombshell taking her last bow. But her death was only the beginning of a darker chain. Alan Lake, her third husband, unraveled almost immediately. Grief consumed him. Friends watched as he drank heavily, spoke often of joining her, and burned her clothes in their garden because the sight of them was unbearable. His despair was not hidden. It seemed like a prelude.
I was in touch with Alan and Jason, but it was, our lives had been turned upside down, basically.
On October 10, 1984, exactly 5 months after Diana's death and 16 years to the day after they first met, Lake carried out what he had been hinting at. He entered his teenage son's bedroom, raised a gun, and ended his life. The precision of the timing suggested intent. He wanted his death to be tied to hers, forever. Their son, 14-year-old Jason Dors Lake, was left an orphan, his parents destroyed by the same machine that had once given them everything. The estate that should have provided for Jason was a hollow shell. Years of debts, unpaid taxes, and legal fees had eaten away at Diana's earnings. Orchard Manor, the Sunningdale home where she had lived out her final years, was sold off. Memorabilia was shipped to Sotheby's for auction. When the accountants finished, very little remained of what had once been a fortune. Jason's future had to be entrusted to his half-brother, Gary Dawson, Diana's son from her second marriage. The shadow of that loss followed Jason into adulthood. Carrying his mother's name was less blessing than burden. Friends said he never recovered from the violent way his parents' lives ended or from the public nature of their downfall. For every mention of Diana's films or glamour, there was the memory of scandal, suicide, and loss. Jason bore all of it. In 2019, fate struck again. At the age of 50, Jason died from the combined effects of alcohol and the painkiller tramadol, an accidental overdose, the coroner ruled. 3 generations were now tied to tragedy. Diana consumed by scandal and cancer, Alan by suicide, Jason by substances that dulled what he could never outrun. From the moment Dennis Hamilton had packaged Diana in 1951, the machine had been set in motion. Fame brought her stardom, but it also delivered betrayal, bankruptcy, death, and grief that echoed far beyond her own life. Swindon remembers Diana Dors in bronze and stone. A 1991 statue by John Clinch stands at Shaw Ridge in West Swindon, and a blue plaque unveiled in 2017 marks her birthplace on Kent Road. They honor the hometown girl who clawed her way into British stardom, who briefly tasted Hollywood, and who left behind a story too complicated to reduce to a single nickname. For Diana was never just one thing. She was not simply Dennis Hamilton's victim, though his financial exploitation left her ruined. She was not only Hollywood's casualty, though RKO's hypocrisy in firing her for the very notoriety they had encouraged showed the industry at its coldest. And she was not merely a creation of the tabloids, though their hunger for scandal both kept her alive and consumed her whole. What made Diana remarkable was her refusal to fade into the background. When Hamilton stole her fortune, she sold her secrets. When Hollywood slammed its doors, she returned to Britain and built a career on television. When bankruptcy stripped her bare, she laughed at her own legend on chat shows, wielding wit like armor. Even as cancer closed in, she crafted one last riddle that guaranteed the headlines would not forget her. Comparisons to Marilyn Monroe followed her throughout her life, but they miss the essence of her story. Monroe's tragedy ended in a single, shocking collapse at 36, preserving her beauty in amber. Diana's tragedy stretched across decades and generations, grinding her down slowly as she reinvented herself again and again, while the past refused to let her go. Monroe became myth. Dors remained human, flawed, resourceful, and ultimately breakable. Every scandal that bought her temporary security chipped away at her long-term worth. Every confession that paid a bill also trapped her further inside the caricature Hamilton had built. Yet she would not vanish. That stubborn endurance, messy and costly as it was, is her real legacy. The cipher she left behind works as metaphor. Maybe the money was real, maybe it was invention. But either way, the mystery endures. Diana Dors knew that stories, not statues, are what last. Her life became a cautionary tale of fame's bargains, one where survival was possible, but never free.